Korea. The anecdote that I got approved by my organization is the continued debate over the death of Kim Jong-il, or the potential death of Kim Jong-il, which is always rumored. Every 6 months or so, the rumor in South Korean press comes up, he's about to die. For an interesting point, this rumor popped up a few months ago, and our co-founder of CNAS, Kurt Campbell, who's now Assistant Secretary of State, was quoted in press as saying that Kim Jong-il will probably die in 2 or 3 years. Oh, he said in 4 years, I think, in which the North Korean press actually responded. Strikingly enough, they said, well, assistant secretaries tend to only last 2 or 3 years. So I guess they're saying at least Kim Jong-il will outlast Kurt on that. But the example I'd have in this that I'd like to point out in terms of prediction, I was lucky enough to represent my agency in a meeting at the NIC. Once one of these rumors came out in South Korean press, the NIC came together to talk about, is Kim Jong-il going to die? And we went around we talked it out for quite a while, and eventually we went on the room to every agency, yes or no, is Kim Jong-il going to die? And uniformly, no, 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 until they got to me and I said, yes, absolutely. And everyone kind of looked at me like I was strange. I said, well, not today, probably not tomorrow, but at some point, yes, he is going to die. And just because he's not going to die tomorrow doesn't mean we don't need to think about it and think about the ramifications of that and start planning for it and potentially be ready for it. When you're in government, it's very hard to be proactive. You tend to just be hitting the tennis ball back over the net from the automatic machine of policy. But that's really the key to being prepared for the black swans, is thinking ahead and thinking about those potential for change and what's going to make things change in the future and what directions that'll go. Thank you.
Thanks, Abe. Now, finally, before we go to the floor for questions, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. John Noggle. John's a 1988 graduate of West Point, a member of the Defense Policy Board. He fought in the first Gulf War as an armor officer, then went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar to do his dissertation, to do his doctorate, and wrote a dissertation on counterinsurgency that he modestly refers to as the best dissertation on counterinsurgency written in the 1990s. His friends in college remind him that it was the only dissertation on counterinsurgency written in the 1990s. He's the author of a book, Learning to Eat Soup with a Knife, Counterinsurgency Lessons from Malaya and Vietnam, and served as served at General Petraeus' right hand in writing the counterinsurgency field manual, and in my view, had a pivotal role, did a pivotal public service in migrating counterinsurgency doctrine from the fringe of the national conversation to the center. And one way he did that was by appearing in a full Army dress uniform on Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, holding the Army's counterinsurgency field manual. I thought he was funnier than Jon Stewart, and that for me is a model of what enlightened leaders in the military or in civilian government can do. Take issues of critical national importance that are out there on the fringe and bring them into everybody's living room so we can talk about them as a country, and we can learn and we can adapt and we can change to deal with new challenges as they arise. So, John.
Thank you. Thank you, Nate. Let me use that one.
Sure.
Thank you, Nate, very much. That was the funniest discussion Jon Stewart has ever had on a piece of Army doctrine. And I'm pretty confident in that argument. I feel pretty good about that. I'm just going to try to tie things together as quickly as I can to get to your questions. So I'm going to talk just 4 quick points. One is we're facing a new world. In that new world, we face new threats. To defeat those threats, to protect ourselves against those threats, we need a new strategy, and that requires changes throughout the U.S. government, but in particular, what changes I'll talk about today are in the intelligence community, and I'm going to try to do that in 4 minutes or less. So the world has changed, and we all know this. I've seen this dramatically in my own career. I started my career as a West Point cadet patrolling the inter-German border, and we faced a very real, very visible enemy that looked just like us. And we had an extraordinary military, intelligence, and foreign policy community and organization that was designed to deter and, if necessary, defeat this organization that looked just like us. And within 2 years of me conducting those patrols with live rounds in the heart of Germany, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the world changed dramatically. And I fought, rather than fighting the Soviet Union as I expected to as an armor officer, I fought Iraq, a country that we never expected to fight, but I knew how to do it. It was a very easy fight from an intelligence perspective, from an intellectual's perspective. I simply shot the tanks that didn't look like mine. And my military career ended back in Iraq. I never got to fight wars in any of the good countries. And this time, the hard part wasn't killing my enemy, it was finding my enemy. I couldn't figure out who the enemy was. And that points to the new threats we face in this world for a number of reasons, including our extraordinary, conventionally capable military. Our enemies aren't going to fight us that way anymore. They're going to fight us asymmetrically. They're going to wage war in the shadows. They're going to pretend to be civilians and fight us as terrorists and insurgents. And so we need to think anew about how to defeat this new kind of enemy. And over time, we've adapted and we've developed, particularly in the military, increasingly in the other organs of the U.S. government, we've come to understand that to defeat these people who wage war as civilians from within the protection, the concealment of pretending not to be legal enemies, we've learned that to defeat those insurgents, we have to conduct a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy. And we've learned how to do that in Iraq. We're doing it now in Afghanistan. We're doing it very successfully without as much notice, which is the best kind of a counterinsurgency campaign, in Yemen, in the Philippine Islands, in a number of other countries around the globe. What I think we have to do now is understand conceptually that what we're fighting is not really a war against al-Qaeda as much as it is a global counterinsurgency campaign in which we have to certainly conduct counterterrorism operations to kill or capture identified enemies, but we also have to use all of the other tools of power to change the conditions that lead people to become enemies of the United States and our friends, to decide to want to use terror against us. And conceptually, that's very difficult. That's much harder, and it imposes a lot more challenges, not just on the military, but on all elements of our government. In particular, it means that the intelligence community has to do a lot of much more difficult things. And Andrew talked about the fact that in Afghanistan, in Iraq, certainly when I was fighting there, we had pretty good intelligence over time, we thought, on who our enemies were. But we didn't have any intelligence at all on who our friends were. And we had a very hard time understanding that somebody who seemed to be our friend today was actually our enemy, or could be convinced to be our enemy or our friend, depending on the actions the insurgents took and the actions we took. And that sophisticated level of understanding of tribal power structures, of family relationships, of water rights and property rights, those sorts of questions are not what our intelligence community is designed to understand. But those are the things we have to understand in order to fight to win the wars we're fighting today. And most importantly, perhaps, to succeed in these kind of wars, we need a whole-of-government approach. We need all of the elements of government. Ambassador Negroponte talked about the important role he had in making sure that all of the intelligence community would talk to each other. And that was an enormous task, and he deserves great credit for moving that ball so far down the field. But we also need the State Department and the military and justice and the FBI and Treasury all to integrate their understanding. And they're doing pretty well on the battlefield, right? The urgency of life or death decisions tends to break down institutional barriers, stovepipes, what we call cones of excellence in Washington. But we haven't done as good a job in our nation's capital in bringing all of the agencies together and in bringing everybody's special powers to bear on these enemies we face that continue to confront us. And so that's some of the work we do that I know Ambassador Negroponte continues to do, and I look forward now to spending a few minutes talking with you about how we're doing at those tasks and how we can do it better.